Okay, thanks for this opportunity. I also am a owner of a pair of aging eyes, so I'm quite interested in the topic. And certainly, my experience of aging eyes doesn't necessarily reflect what the expectations seem to be by younger people, and probably even me when I was younger. So this is a very brief presentation, which is the result of research I've undertaken uh, while I've been working on the forthcoming SEN standard on melanopic lighting for health and well-being. You've almost all seen this before, and it's well known that one of the impacts of aging is the gradual yellowing and reduction in transmission of the lens in the eye. This on its own has resulted in recommendations to significantly increase the amount of light provided for visual tasks for older people. There's therefore also an expectation that this aging effect would equally, if not more so, reduce the effects generated in the IPRGC, whose action spectrum is significantly at the blue end of the spectrum. Many early papers promoted this expectation, and it's kind of got enshrined in quite a few documents and papers already. Those papers were almost entirely based on documentary research and not on any experimental activity. So at the moment, the expectation being incorporated into some recommendations for provision of melanopically effective light, including the DIN TS 67600. And it's also incorporated as part of CIE S026 2018. There's an Appendix A which covers the filtering and age correction based purely on the reduction in transmission. So, like many oversimplifications of aspects of light and vision, this is now beginning to have been disproved through a number of experimental papers, opening up interesting considerations for effective lighting implementation. Typically, experimental methods rely on measuring melatonin in blood plasma, saliva, or urine at night, typically after measuring the control melatonin levels before any interventions. This has become a standard way of determining the impact of IPRGC influence, but it must be noted that this can only be an indicator of effectiveness of any particular experimental intervention. Follow-up studies are sometimes applied to see what, if any, impact the particular intervention has had on long-term sleep patterns and their implications circadian effects. So, in among the papers I found, and I will totally admit to using AI to help find the papers, not to see what AI said about them. I was looking in areas that, as a lighting person, I don't normally look into, a lot in ophthalmology, for example. So among what came out were two papers by Raymond Najjar, separated by 9 years, one in 2014 and one in 2023. In the earlier paper, he identified a non-linear correlation between lens transmission and melatonin suppression. The second paper is an endeavor to understand why. What Najjar discovered is that the peak spectral response of melatonin suppression moves from around 483 nanometers to 495 nanometers as you age. His conclusion of that is that there is some connection between the S-cone and M-cone receptors and the superchiasmatic nucleus that we do not know or understand, which starts to contribute to melatonin suppression in older individuals. Another set of papers, including one by Tomo Nishi in 2020, looks at the effects of cataract surgery. In this, the aging lens is replaced by a clear or maybe slightly yellow acrylic replacement. These are images much enlarged of what they actually look like. In this case, the yellowing and reduction in transmission of the normal aging lens is totally removed. The Nishi's study was carried out over 169 subjects, although he still considered it a small group. The conclusion to this study was that post-operatively, after 3 months, there was a measured increase in melatonin production, but no difference was shown between those implanted with the yellow lenses and those with clear lenses. So my consideration is that the improvement in melatonin levels may be ascribed to the removal of cataract caused changes to the eye rather than the removal of the yellow age lenses. In this study, there was a confounding factor in that the follow-up was in 3 months. That therefore crossed distinct seasonal boundaries, which also had consequent changes in natural light exposure that were thought in part to be responsible for the increased melatonin production. Another paper by Marina Gimez from 2016 looked at the same issue, but with a much smaller cohort. So again, this was a direct study and follow-up of cataract patients who'd had lenses, aged yellowed lenses replaced with clear acrylic lenses. This concluded that there was no significantly measurable change in melatonin production after cataract surgery. Any short-term change disappeared after 12 months post-operatively. So it was a much longer study on a much smaller cohort. But it was really interesting that the 3-month was confounded possibly by seasonal change. A 12-month study is not. So it's quite clear that there is no direct relationship between the yellowing of the lens and melatonin production. So in that study, there was an increased melatonin production after 2 weeks, but it quickly disappeared. And there was no observable change in sleep or melatonin rhythms between the conditions over time. So these are a few of the papers. There's further studies on cataract, and they all broadly demonstrate the same kind of conclusions, that there's no simple way to determine the need for or quantification of any additional melanopically effective light or any different reduction for the evening phases of the melatonin cycle. So it's clear we don't know enough about the functional relationship between the various structures in the retina and the suprachiasmatic nucleus. There are also papers appearing that indicate that there's IPRGC influence on vision as well, over and above simple control of the iris. So we also must be aware that using melatonin production at night as an indicator of the function of the circadian system is limited. We need to understand much better the positive effects of light dosing during the waking and working hours to help us better define lighting protocols for effective application of non-visual light. There are no simple physiological indicators for this, so studies will need to be based more on reported sleep experience and daytime light exposure measurements. So very brief, but interesting, I think. Thanks very much for that. And anybody got any questions?
Okay, thank you, Kevan. Are there questions from the audience? I see that Oliver asked a question. Oliver, can you read that out loud?
It's quite loud in my environment, so please excuse me. Do you know of any study investigating sleep after lens replacement, yellow lenses versus clear lenses? If I remember, but I might be wrong, there was a study from Sarah Chelappa, but it might have been something different.
I don't know that study. I'd really appreciate if you could let me send me a link to that paper, because I'm really outside what I've done on this already, I'm quite interested actively in extending my knowledge in this area.
Can I add something,
Sure.
Marijke?
Yep.
We did a study pre-post cataract surgery in aged people, and we looked at dim light melatonin onset and sleep, and we saw that there was a phase delay both in dim light melatonin onset and in sleep onset after cataract surgery. So yeah, there is something, and we interpreted that as that because of the replay. These were transparent lenses, no filtering, and we interpreted this as that by replacing the lens by a transparent lens where there was more light, more evening light going above the threshold, and more or less normalizing phase advance that we often see in elderly people.
Marijke, did you do a follow-up over time on this? Because it was quite interesting that the paper I referred to showed a distinct difference in follow-up after 3 months and after 12 months.
We didn't do any follow-up. We have two studies actually. One was in elderly people where we looked at pre-post cataract surgery, and there we saw a difference. We also had a study in young people that we gave orange lenses, filtered contact lenses, for 24 hours, 24 hours a day for 14 days, I believe. And there we saw that melatonin suppression as a marker was adapted actually. So the melatonin suppression pre and post 14 days changed in young people, as if young people were able to adapt while the elderly did not adapt within the time frame that we did the study. So I will look it up and give you both references. Or do
Thank
you
you
do
very
that
much.
already? You have the
Thank you for
Chelapa
those.
study, Oliver. Yeah.
If you can
Okay.
share them, it would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Joachim, you also raise your hand.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. So I also think that some work has been done on the University Hospital of Copenhagen. I know Brønsted, Adam Brønsted did a thesis on this. I also think it was linked to melatonin, but you can look into that, and there are several in that group that has done work, so that could potentially be interesting. And the other thing I'm thinking about is sort of, one thing is sort of the transmission of the lens and the spectral transmission of the lens. The other thing becomes, pupil light reflex and other things, how that impacts this as well. And I think there's some models from University of Darmstadt, but I'm not entirely sure that has looked into some of this.
I think there's a looking at a lot of the papers, there's a lot of confirmation bias on the expectation that there's a massive change in vision as you age because of this occlusion of the lens. If you start trying to take away the confirmation bias and start to look at some of the other studies, I think there's another story here that we need to pay a bit more attention to.
Kevin, may I ask a question?
Sure.
If the end result of all this investigation is that the effects of light on your sleep and melatonin production, yes or no, doesn't shift over lifetime, what does that mean for indoor design?
Well, it's difficult to know because I mean, in the JAR papers, the suggestion that the action spectrum actually changes as you age is quite interesting. I think that's a major question as to what's going on there, and that might well impact how we would approach lighting, and certainly color of light. One thing that's throughout this, as I've mentioned in this paper, pretty much all these studies relate to onset of sleep and melatonin production. What we don't know, and what we're not really getting studies in, is what's happening during the day, because of the lack of obvious indicators to determine what lighting dose is effective on who by how much from the morning light. Then, I mean, that's the question that we really need to ask, because that's the one that's going to impact lighting design and recommendations far, far more than the onset of sleep aspect. I don't know how we do that. I mean, I know some studies are using questionnaire type methods of doing that, which may be the only thing we've got, and that relates, I guess, to sleep and awakeness and attention. But I think it's a big question for us going forward in research in this area, to find a method that we can reliably use to determine exactly what different doses of light in the morning and during the day have, beyond what we understand already.
Okay. Good. So this will get some follow-up in one way or another. Are there any other questions for Kevan?
Yes. Thank you for a great talk. I wondered, working with older participants or older people in other contexts, do you think that there is any low budget way of quantifying aging processes in the eye, other than just asking for it via a questionnaire, like what kind of surgery have you underwent in the past, but maybe also some other test where not a trained ophthalmologist is necessarily needed?
I think that's an interesting, difficult question. Again, it's under no simple solutions. I mean, the Najjar studies and I think the Jimenez studies looked, precisely did measure transmission of the lens preoperatively, or in the case of Najjar, in the course of the studies he was doing with his participants. So those devices exist, but they are, as you say, quite complex, probably expensive, and require experienced and qualified research ophthalmologists to actually get the data you need out of them. So yes, it's possible to make those measurements. Simply, cheaply, and easily, I'm afraid not, I don't think.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, thanks.
Okay.